The sound of rotor blades rolled through the humid air, echoing across the tree line like a distant heartbeat. Somewhere below, the jungle breathed, 1,000 shades of green swaying under the pale Vietnam sun. The air smelled of rain and oil, of earth and metal. It was April 1969, and the war was deep in its middle years. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky that morning, some carrying supplies, others men who would never come back. But one stood apart from the rest, Dust-Off 65. She wasn't armed, no rockets, no door guns blazing, just 4 men and a red cross painted on her side. Their mission wasn't to fight, it was to save. Before we begin, if you enjoy calm stories from history, real moments told through the quiet of reflection, consider subscribing to Commander Hawk History. Every story here honors those who lived through times we can only imagine, told in the calm voice of remembrance. Now, back to Vietnam. The crew of Dust-Off 65 were stationed just south of Da Nang, at a small muddy base surrounded by endless rice fields and tired palms. For weeks, they had been flying rescue missions, medevac runs deep into the jungle, lifting out the wounded under fire. They were young, but old in the eyes. Each flight changed them a little more. Captain Ray Lambert sat in the left seat, 27 years old, from Ohio, with calm eyes and a pilot's patience. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Mason Ward, was barely 23, still carried his college ring, and wrote his mother every Sunday. In the back, Sergeant Tommy Brooks, the crew chief, kept the bird flying. He had a knack for fixing anything with duct tape and grit. Beside him sat Specialist David Raines, the medic, quiet, thin, always the last one off the helicopter and the first one to kneel beside a wounded man. They called their Huey Angel 1, though officially it was just Dust-Off 65. It wasn't the name that mattered, it was the sound. Every soldier who heard the distant thump of a dust-off knew what it meant. Help was coming. That morning, the radio crackled with static and a trembling voice. A platoon pinned near the Songbo River. Heavy casualties. Coordinates followed. No escort available. Too dangerous. Ray looked at his crew. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. He gave a small nod, lifted his helmet, and the blades began to turn. Dust-Off 65 was going back into the fire. The rotors gathered speed, slicing the damp morning air until the Huey lifted free from the red clay. Below them, the base shrank into a patch of tents and dust. Ahead stretched miles of green, rolling jungle canopies and mist rising like smoke from the trees. The rain had ended just before dawn, leaving the world wet and shining, every leaf dripping in silence. Captain Lambert steadied the cyclic. His fingers relaxed on the controls. Mason, beside him, scanned the horizon. They had made this trip dozens of times before, but it never got easier. Every ridgeline, every valley could hide a rifle. The jungle was beautiful and deadly all at once. "Radio check," Lambert said calmly. "Copy, loud and clear," Tommy replied from the back. His voice carried the easy humor of a man who knew the risk but refused to fear it. Raines, the medic, didn't speak. He was busy checking his gear, the morphine, the bandages, the IV line coiled like a snake in his hand. The Huey banked east, heading toward the coordinates relayed by the infantry below. The Songbo River glinted ahead, winding through the jungle like a strip of broken mirror. Somewhere down there, men were bleeding into the earth. The radio came alive again. Dust off 65, be advised, area's hot. We've got enemy movement north of the river, no gunships available. Lambert's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed steady. Roger that. We'll make one pass. Mark your position with smoke. He turned to his co-pilot. You ready, Mason? Mason gave a thin smile. Always. The helicopter dropped lower, skimming the treetops. The jungle whipped by, branches flashing close enough to touch. Then, faintly, they saw it, a column of orange smoke rising between the trees, curling against the thick green. Visual on smoke, Lambert said, coming in low. The moment they broke over the clearing, the radio exploded with shouts. Incoming fire, East Ridge, get down! Tracer rounds cut through the mist, red and green sparks streaking past the windshield. The thump of distant rifles echoed, then the sharper crack of machine guns. Rounds pinged off the metal skin of the Huey, one punching through the tail boom with a hollow clang. Taking fire, Tommy yelled. We're hit but stable. Lambert didn't flinch. Hold steady. We're going in. The Huey descended fast, its skids brushing the tall grass as Rains leaned out, scanning for wounded. Below, soldiers waved frantically, dirt-streaked, exhausted, their helmets flashing under the rotor wash. 2 stretchers, 1 critical, a voice shouted. Rains jumped down before the helicopter had fully settled. The air was chaos, gunfire, shouting, the smell of cordite and mud. Yet inside it all, Dust Off 65 stood steady, blades roaring like an angel's wings above the storm. The jungle swallowed sound, but inside that clearing, it was deafening. The Huey's blades churned the tall grass flat, kicking up leaves, dust, and smoke in wild circles. Rains crouched low, sprinting toward the nearest man on the ground, a soldier gripping his leg, blood soaking through a torn pant leg, eyes wide with shock. I've got you, buddy, Rains said, his voice steady, almost gentle. He slipped the IV needle in with practiced hands, the rotor wash tugging at his sleeves. 2 more soldiers helped him lift the wounded man onto the stretcher. Above them, tracer fire hissed through the trees like angry hornets. Come on, Tommy shouted from the doorway. He leaned out, one hand gripping the frame, scanning the tree line for movement. A bullet cracked past his shoulder, punching a hole in the side panel. He didn't duck. He'd been here too many times before to flinch. Rains, we're hot here, Lambert called over the radio. 30 seconds. Copy, Rains answered, dragging the stretcher through the grass. His boots sank into the mud, the sound of the helicopter drowning everything except his own heartbeat. The second casualty was worse. Unconscious, chest wound. He worked fast, tying the bandage, whispering something only the wounded could hear. Another burst of gunfire. A tree exploded nearby, splinters raining across the field. Mason's voice came over the intercom, calm but urgent. They're closing in from the ridge, Ray. Lambert's reply was flat, measured. We're not leaving them. The medic shoved the last stretcher onto the deck, climbed in after it, and slammed the door. Go! Lambert pulled on the collective. The Huey surged upward, straining, rising into the humid air. Rounds chased them, streaks of fire and smoke cutting through the clearing. One hit the tail again, shuddering the frame. Tail rotor's good, Tommy yelled, checking the gauges. We're still flying. Below, the soldiers grew smaller, waving in the smoke. The clearing vanished beneath the trees, and the noise faded into a low, distant hum. The jungle swallowed everything once more. Rains knelt beside the stretchers, his gloves slick with blood and rain. He could feel the vibration of the engines through the metal floor, the faint tremor that said the helicopter was alive, carrying its fragile cargo home. Lambert looked out through the scratched windshield, the horizon glowing faintly under gray clouds. They had done it again. Another rescue, another miracle. But somewhere deep in the sky ahead, unseen and waiting, the war was far from finished. For a few long minutes, the world seemed calm again. The jungle slipped away beneath them in slow waves of green, the smoke of battle fading into the distance. Inside the Huey, the thrum of the rotor became almost soothing, a steady rhythm that filled the silence between breaths. Captain Lambert adjusted the collective, easing the helicopter into level flight. "How are they doing back there?" he asked. Raines glanced up from the wounded. "Holding on. One stable, the others fading fast. He needs blood, but we'll make it." "Roger that," Lambert said quietly. He didn't say what they both knew, that even the fastest flight might not be fast enough. Mason leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was heavy with clouds now, the light dimming to a dull bronze. The rain would come soon, and with it, the fog that made navigation a guessing game. He tuned the radio, picking up static and fragments of chatter from other units. Somewhere, another dust-off was lifting off. Somewhere else, one was being called home. Tommy's voice cut in through the headset. "Fuel's good. Engine's a little rough, but she's fine." "Keep an eye on her," Lambert replied. The medic shifted one of the stretchers closer to the bulkhead. The soldier's breathing was shallow, his face pale and still. Raines touched his shoulder gently as if to anchor him. "Hang in there," he said softly. The Huey shuddered as a gust of wind rolled off the hills. Lambert steadied her easily. He'd been flying long enough to feel what the helicopter needed before it asked. The sky opened in flashes, sheets of rain ahead, a storm pushing down from the mountains. "Storm fronts moving faster than forecast," Mason noted, squinting through the windshield. Lambert sighed through his nose. "Figures. Always does." They veered northwest, hoping to outrun the weather, but Vietnam had a way of swallowing its own light. In minutes, the horizon disappeared into haze. The rain began, soft at first, then harder, beating against the windshield like 1,000 small fists. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The horizon was gone, just cloud and rain and the hum of the engine. "Stay on course," Lambert said quietly. Raines looked up from the stretchers, feeling the subtle change in the air. The Huey was heavier now, slower. He could sense it, the storm pulling them down, testing their resolve. Outside, the jungle disappeared beneath a curtain of gray. Inside, 4 men kept flying, trusting in each other and the machine that had never failed them. Yet somewhere inside that storm, trouble waited, quiet, patient, and unseen. The storm hit harder than any of them expected. Sheets of rain swept across the rotor blades, hammering the Huey until it felt like flying through a waterfall. The sky was nothing but gray, a wall of water and wind. Lightning flashed somewhere ahead, painting the cockpit white for an instant, then plunging it back into shadow. "Visibility 0, Mason said, his voice tight. "We're flying blind, Ray." Lambert's hand stayed steady on the controls. "Keep your instruments centered. Trust the gauges, not your eyes." The helicopter rocked as a sudden downdraft slammed against it. Tommy grabbed the overhead handle, bracing himself as the cabin lurched. "Tails light," he shouted. "She's bucking." "I've got it," Lambert said. The cyclic moved in tiny, precise motions. His breathing never changed. Years of flying had taught him calm. Panic was what killed pilots, not storms. Rains looked up from the wounded. The cabin lights flickered, turning the space into a pulse of dim red and gold. He could feel the vibration through the metal floor, the shudder of a machine fighting the sky. Outside, the wind howled like something alive. The rotor's deep thump was drowned beneath the roar of rain. Mason could barely make out the altimeter needles shaking. "We're losing altitude." "Pulling power," Lambert replied. The engine groaned in protest. "Come on, girl, hold together." A burst of static filled the headset, then a voice, faint, broken. "Dust off 65. This is Da Nang Control. Do you copy?" "You're off course." "Repeat. You're off." The rest vanished into static. Lambert keyed the mic. "Da Nang, we copy. We're caught in heavy weather trying to climb." No reply, just static and rain. The Huey shuddered again, dropping 20 feet before the rotors caught lift. Loose gear rattled, a stretcher shifted. Tommy moved fast, strapping it down with his belt. "Engine temps rising," he warned. Lambert's jaw tightened. "We'll clear this cell soon. Just hang on." But the storm had no mercy. It rolled over the hills, swallowing everything, radio, sight, and sound. They were flying inside a living cloud. Rains steadied himself beside the wounded. His hands shook now, not from fear, but from the strange stillness that came with knowing control was slipping away. He looked out the window. Nothing but gray mist. No horizon, no ground, no sky. Mason muttered, "If we keep dropping, we'll hit the ridgeline." Lambert adjusted the cyclic again, sweat streaking his temple. "Not today," he said softly. The helicopter strained upward, the blades clawing through the rain. For a moment, they broke through. The light changed, and the sky opened. But in that instant, a sharp metallic crack echoed through the cabin. The sound every pilot dreads. Something vital had just given way. The sound came again. A deep metallic grind followed by a sharp ping, like steel snapping under strain. Every man in the Huey felt it in his chest. Mason's eyes darted to the gauges. "Torque pressure's dropping." Tommy leaned toward the back. "Tail rotor's whining, sir. Might be the drive shaft." Lambert didn't look away from the horizon. There was none, only cloud. "We can't lose the tail. If it goes, we spin." The helicopter lurched sideways, nose dipping as the left skid caught the wind. Rains grabbed the stretcher, bracing himself between the litters and the floor. One of the wounded men let out a groan, barely conscious, still clinging to life. "Hold on back there!" Lambert shouted over the storm. The Huey groaned again. Every rivet seemed to scream. The vibration was worse now. A deep tremor running through the frame. The rotor blades blurred above them, fighting for lift. "RPM's unstable!" Mason yelled. "She's overspinning!" Lambert eased the collective down. Easy, easy. The rain outside was relentless, hammering against the windshield so hard it felt like bullets. Lightning flashed again, closed this time, so bright it lit the jungle below, a dark ocean of green swaying in chaos. For a brief second, they could see the ridge line, jagged trees, black rocks, and a river twisting far below. Then it vanished again in mist. Tommy moved to the rear access door, peering out. "We're flying too low!" Lambert's knuckles were white on the stick. "I know." Rains crouched over the wounded, tightening straps, whispering half-prayers under his breath. His voice was soft, almost drowned by the engine noise. "Just hold on, boys. Almost home." But even as he said it, he knew home was far away. The instrument panel flickered. One of the bulbs popped, sending a spark across the dash. The cabin filled with a burnt smell. Oil and metal. Mason's voice cracked. "Sir, engine temps redlining." "Feathering power," Lambert barked. "We'll ride her till she quits." The Huey shook violently, then steadied. A strange quiet settled in, the kind that comes just before disaster. Through the fog, Lambert caught a glimpse. A clearing, maybe a flat stretch of jungle or a rice paddy reflecting the gray sky. It was small, too small for comfort, but it was something. "There!" he shouted. "We've got a spot!" Tommy followed his gaze. "You're not going to try to land in that, are you?" Lambert's voice was firm, calm, absolute. "We don't have a choice." The engine howled one last time, a wounded sound, high and thin. The Huey began to descend, the rain parting around it in swirling sheets. Rains held tight to the wounded, his heart pounding. He could feel the machine dying under them, could hear the blades slow just enough to change pitch. Mason whispered, "Come on, girl. One more mile." The helicopter tilted forward, nose down, diving through the rain toward the unseen ground. And in that moment, every man aboard the Huey knew the next 60 seconds would decide everything. The Huey dropped fast, too fast. The jungle canopy rose to meet it, a blur of green and black. Lambert kept his grip steady, his eyes locked on the tiny clearing ahead. "Brace for impact!" he shouted. Rains threw himself across the wounded, wrapping his arms around the stretcher frame. Mason and Tommy grabbed the side rails, their helmets knocking together from the turbulence. The Huey's tail swung violently, fishtailing through the air. The engine coughed, once, twice, then sputtered into silence. The sudden loss of sound was haunting. For a heartbeat, all that remained was the whisper of wind through the broken glass and the distant roar of thunder. Then came the crash. The skids hit first, digging into soft earth. The nose dipped, blades clipping the top of a tree before shattering with a sound like tearing metal. The Huey twisted, skidding sideways, rolling through mud and debris. Inside, men were thrown like rag dolls, straps snapping, helmets cracking against steel. When it stopped, there was silence again. Rain poured through the shattered windshield. Smoke curled from the engine, mingling with steam from the wet ground. Somewhere, a small fire hissed before the rain smothered it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then a cough. Rains groaned, rolling over, feeling the sting of glass in his palms. He blinked through the haze, his ears ringing, his vision swimming. "Tommy," he called softly. A faint voice answered from the front. "Still here, Doc." Mason's seat had torn loose. He hung upside down, half conscious, a stream of rain running over his face. Lambert was still in the pilot's chair, head slumped forward. Blood streaked his temple, but his hand still gripped the cyclic. Rains crawled to him, shaking his shoulder. "Captain, you with me?" Lambert groaned, opening one eye. "Everyone alive?" "Mostly," Rain said. "We're in one piece somehow." Outside, the jungle hissed with rain and cicadas. The smell of burning fuel was faint, but it was there. "Fire hazard," Mason muttered weakly. "We've got to move." Lambert nodded, trying to undo his harness. "Get the wounded first." Rains crawled back to the stretcher. One of the soldiers, The young one with the shrapnel wound was breathing, shallow but steady. The other was gone. His hand still clutched the tag around his neck, his eyes open toward the canopy. Raines bowed his head for a moment, just long enough for a breath. Then he turned back to work. "Tommy," Lambert said, his voice weak but steady, "check the radio. See if we've got anything left." Tommy wiped mud from his face. "Antenna's gone, sir. She's not talking to anyone." "Then we'll do it the old-fashioned way," Lambert said. "Smoke and sound." The rain didn't stop. It came in sheets, heavy and endless. The clearing around them was a crater of mud, shattered trees, and twisted metal. But through it all, the Huey stood upright. Broken, yes, but still there. A symbol of something stubborn. And in that rain-soaked silence, the crew of Dust-Off 65 gathered themselves, bruised, bleeding, but alive. They didn't know how far they were from base. They didn't know if rescue would come. But they knew one thing. They had survived the fall. And for now, that was enough. The rain eased by morning, falling now in a soft mist that clung to the leaves. A pale light filtered through the clouds, turning the clearing into a world of gray and green. Steam rose from the wreck of the Huey, mixing with the scent of oil and wet earth. Captain Lambert sat against a fallen log, his arm bound with torn canvas. Raines had cleaned and dressed the wound with what little gauze he had left. Tommy had rigged a makeshift poncho out of a rotor cover, while Mason scavenged through what remained of the supply crate. They worked in silence. The jungle around them hummed, alive and watching. "Radio's dead," Mason muttered, pulling the useless unit from the wreckage. "No spare batteries, no long-range set. We're blind." Lambert nodded slowly. "Then we make ourselves visible." He pointed toward the tree line, where the clearing opened slightly to the north. "We'll burn off what fuel's left. Thick smoke might get picked up by recon." Tommy frowned. "If it doesn't bring Charlie first." Raines glanced up. "We're too deep for that. Closest friendly patrol is 30 miles east, maybe more." Lambert sighed, rubbing the dirt from his hands. "Then it's us and the jungle." The fire came to life slowly, soaked wood hissing, smoke curling into the wet air. It wasn't much, but it was hope. Raines took a moment to check on the wounded survivor. The young soldier's breathing was still shallow but steady. His name tag read J. Bowen. Raines adjusted his bandage gently, whispering, "Hang in there, son." Tommy sat nearby, staring out into the trees. "Ever feel like it's quiet? Too quiet?" Mason chuckled softly. "That's 'cause you can't hear what's listening." No one answered. They didn't have to. The jungle seemed endless. Towering trees, vines thick as rope, and the distant sound of dripping water. Every now and then a bird would cry out, sharp and sudden, then fade into silence again. Lambert leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He thought of base, the roar of choppers, the clatter of tools, the smell of coffee and diesel. Home, in its strange, noisy way. Raines sat across from him, cleaning a scalpel in the rain. "We'll need to ration water soon. The stream can't be far." "I'll take Tommy," Mason offered. "We'll scout ahead once the light's better." "Stay within shouting distance," Lambert said. "No heroics." They nodded. As Mason stood, adjusting his rifle strap, a rustle came from the brush. All four men froze. The sound was faint, but deliberate. Not the wind, not the rain. Lambert raised a hand, signaling silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, another rustle. Closer this time. Rains slowly reached for his sidearm. From the tree line, a shape emerged. Small, barefoot, and thin as a reed. A child, Vietnamese, no older than 10, holding a rusted tin can. His eyes were wide with fear and curiosity. The crew lowered their weapons. The boy stared at them for a heartbeat, then turned and vanished into the green. Tommy exhaled. Guess we're not alone after all. Lambert's gaze lingered on the trees. No, we never were. The jungle swallowed the silence again, patient, ancient, and waiting. By noon, the air hung thick and heavy with humidity. The rain had stopped, but the jungle never truly dried. Every leaf still dripped, every breath carried the scent of wet soil and decay. Mason and Tommy moved ahead, machetes in hand, cutting a narrow path through the undergrowth. Lambert followed behind, leaning on a stick Rains had fashioned from a rotor strut. They moved slowly, listening, not just for danger, but for water. Stream's got to be close, Mason said, brushing aside a curtain of vines. Ground's sloping downhill. Rains nodded, his shirt clinging to him with sweat. Listen! They stopped. Somewhere in the distance came a faint trickle. Water. Over stone. Bingo, Tommy whispered. The 4 men pushed through the last tangle of brush and stepped into a shallow ravine. There it was, a narrow stream winding between mossy rocks, its surface reflecting fragments of sunlight that made it through the canopy. Mason knelt first, scooping a handful of water to his lips. Tastes like rain. Boil it anyway, Rain said automatically, kneeling beside him. If we've still got matches. Tommy held up a dented tin cup. 1 left. Lambert crouched at the edge, letting the cool water run over his hands. For a moment, it felt like peace, a reminder of something clean and familiar. We fill the canteens, he said, then head back before dark. The jungle was quiet here, too quiet. Even the birds had gone still. Rains looked around, uneasy. Ever get the feeling we're being watched? Mason smirked. Doc, in this place, everything's watching. As they filled their packs, Tommy spotted something downstream, a glint of metal half buried in the mud. He waded closer and pulled it free. It was a dog tag, dulled with age, the name barely legible. Looks American, he said softly. Rains took it from him. Probably one of ours. Maybe shot down months ago. Lambert turned it over in his palm. Or years. They followed the stream a little farther. There were other signs now. Broken bamboo poles, a half-burned cooking pot, an old boot with the sole worn thin, a campsite, long abandoned. Somebody lived here, Mason murmured. Or hid here, Lambert corrected. They stood in silence, surrounded by ghosts of the war that still lingered between the trees. Rains glanced up at the sky. If we've been here 2 days and no birds overhead, it means command doesn't know where we went down. Lambert didn't answer right away. He just stared at the flowing water. We'll keep the fire going, he finally said. They'll see the smoke. Yeah, Tommy muttered, if the rain gives us a break. As they began the trek back toward the clearing, the light was fading, a golden haze slipping through the trees. The jungle came alive again with distant sounds, insects, frogs, and the far-off call of something unrecognizable. They moved carefully, each footstep sinking into the soft mud. The forest seemed to close behind them, erasing their trail as if they had never been there. By the time they reached the crash site, the smoke from their fire was gone. smothered by the afternoon rain. Lambert stood staring at the Huey, its metal skin dark and wet, reflecting the dying light. Tommy set down his pack. "You think anyone's looking for us, sir?" Lambert hesitated, then said quietly, "They'll look, but I don't know if they'll find." And with that, the jungle swallowed the last of the day, leaving Dustoff 65 alone again, surrounded by a sea of green and the long echo of silence. Night came faster this time. The rain returned, light at first, then heavy again, that endless rhythm that became a kind of heartbeat through the trees. The men huddled beneath what was left of the Huey's fuselage, wrapped in ponchos that barely kept the water out. The fire was gone. Everything was too wet to burn. The jungle was black, darker than any city night, darker even than the inside of the bird when the lights first went out. Raines checked on Private Bowen again. The boy's fever had broken, but he was weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. Raines dabbed his forehead with a strip of clean cloth, whispering, "You did good, kid. You're still with us." Mason sat nearby, staring at the wreckage. "You ever think about what happens if nobody comes?" Lambert looked up slowly. "They'll come." "Yeah," Mason said softly. "But what if they don't?" For a while, no one spoke. The rain filled the silence, pattering against the metal skin of the helicopter. It was almost soothing. Almost. Tommy broke the quiet with a low chuckle. "You remember that mess hall back at base? The one with the jukebox that only played 2 songs? Raines smiled faintly. "Yeah, always the same ones. Brown-Eyed Girl and House of the Rising Sun." Lambert grinned in the dark. "I used to hate those songs." Mason leaned back against a crate. "Bet you give anything to hear 'em now." The laughter was soft, tired, but real. For a moment, it felt like they were back there, before the crash, before the rain, before the jungle had swallowed them whole. Then the sound came again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A pop. Then another. Gunfire. They froze. Lambert raised his head, listening. The shots were far off, maybe a mile or more. Single bursts, not sustained fire. Then silence again. "Could be a patrol," Mason whispered. "Or an ambush," Lambert said quietly. They waited. Minutes passed. The rain softened once more, and the jungle seemed to lean closer, listening with them. Finally, Raines spoke. "This place, it doesn't care who's right or wrong, it just takes." No one argued. Tommy shifted closer to the wounded man, pulling his poncho tighter. "My old man used to say war's just weather. Some storms you walk through, some you don't." Lambert looked toward the trees, eyes heavy. "Then we keep walking." Lightning flashed somewhere far away, turning the clouds a dull white for just a heartbeat. It lit their faces, exhausted, muddy, but still alive. Mason exhaled slowly. "You think folks back home know we're still out here?" Raines smiled faintly. "Maybe, maybe not. But someday, someone will tell it." The captain's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Then let's give them something worth telling." The rain kept falling, steady and endless, as the crew of Dustoff 65 sat in silence. 4 men and 1 wounded soldier, adrift in a war that refused to end. Morning came slow and gray. Mist hung low over the clearing, curling through the twisted wreck of the Huey like smoke. The rain had eased to a soft drizzle, and the jungle breathed again, 1,000 tiny sounds of life waking up. Lambert stirred first, his back aching from the metal floor. He rose quietly, stretching, scanning the tree line. Everything looked the same. Too much green, too much stillness. Mason was already outside, crouched by the edge of the clearing, poking at the mud. "Tracks," he said softly. "Small ones. Barefoot." Tommy joined him, squinting. "That kid?" "I has to be," Mason said. "Came through sometime in the night." Raines looked up from where he sat tending Bowen. "You think he's alone?" Lambert shook his head. "No one's alone out here. They spent the morning gathering what they could. Strips of aluminum for signaling, torn fabric for makeshift bandages. Mason and Tommy took turns trying to dry damp cartridges near a small ember of fire. The smell of wet earth and smoke filled the air. Then a sound, faint at first, like footsteps brushing through wet leaves. Lambert turned toward the tree line. "Hold!" The leaves parted, and there he was again. The same boy, barefoot, thin, with a tin can hanging from a string around his neck. His dark eyes darted between the men, wary but curious. Raines stood slowly, palms open. "Hey there, son. You remember us?" The boy hesitated, then took a step forward. From the can he pulled a bundle wrapped in banana leaves. He laid it on the ground and stepped back. Raines approached carefully, kneeling to unwrap it. Inside was sticky rice, still warm. Tommy blinked. "He brought us food." Lambert knelt beside them, his voice soft. "He's not just watching, he's helping." The boy pointed toward the east, then made a motion like a helicopter, his arms spinning, eyes wide with meaning. Mason frowned. "He's saying, 'A chopper?'" Lambert's pulse quickened. "Maybe he saw one." The boy nodded rapidly, repeating the motion. "Boom! Sky," he said, the words broken, but clear enough. Raines smiled. "You speak English, huh?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he pointed again, then turned, motioning for them to follow. Lambert looked at his crew. "If there's a chance," Raines interrupted gently, glancing at Bowen. "We can't carry him far, not without a stretcher." Lambert thought for a moment, then nodded. "Tommy, you stay with Doc and the wounded. Mason, you're with me. We'll scout ahead." The boy waited at the tree line, watching them carefully. When they started toward him, he turned and slipped into the forest without a sound. The jungle swallowed them almost immediately. The air was thick, the ground uneven, vines grabbing at their boots. The boy moved fast, sure-footed, glancing back only to make sure they were following. After an hour, they reached a small rise overlooking a wide stretch of jungle. In the distance, a thin column of black smoke rose into the sky, straight, deliberate, human. Mason whispered, "That's no campfire." Lambert's eyes narrowed. "Could be a crash or a pickup zone." The boy pointed toward it, then pressed his hands together in prayer. "You go," he said softly. Lambert placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, kid, real good." Mason glanced at the smoke again. "Let's get back. We've got something to tell the others." And for the first time in days, the jungle didn't feel so heavy. The sound of the stream nearby, the smell of wet leaves, they all felt different now, because hope, faint and fragile, was back in the air. They moved fast, or as fast as the jungle allowed. The boy led for a short while, then disappeared back into the green, silent as a shadow. Lambert and Mason pressed forward, guided by the column of smoke that drifted lazily through the gray sky ahead. The air was thick with heat. Every step sank into soft ground, and insects whined around their ears. Their boots were soaked, their clothes clinging to them like second skin. But the smoke, that single black thread, kept them going. After an hour, the sound of the jungle began to change. The insects grew quieter. The air smelled faintly of fuel. Mason slowed his pace, his rifle raised. "You smell that?" Lambert nodded. "Yeah, aviation gas." They crested a small ridge, crouching low. Below them lay the remains of another crash. Not a Huey, but a smaller bird. The frame was twisted, its tail broken clean off. Smoke curled from the wreck, rising straight into the sky. Lambert squinted. "Looks recent." Mason scanned the area through his binoculars. No movement. Could have gone down in the same storm that hit us. They descended carefully, their boots sinking into the mud as they approached. The smell of burnt metal and oil grew stronger. The ground around the wreck was scorched, still warm in places. Lambert circled the fuselage. "Loach Scout Chopper," he muttered. "Observation model. 2-man crew." "Anyone inside?" Mason asked. Lambert leaned in through the shattered canopy. 2 helmets, 1 seat empty, the other occupied. The pilot was slumped forward, his flight suit blackened by smoke. Lambert reached in and gently pulled the man back. He didn't make it. Mason exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Poor bastard!" They searched what was left of the wreck. The radio was smashed beyond repair, but in the cargo compartment, Mason found a half-empty ration pack, a flare gun, and a sealed map case. Lambert opened the case, spreading the damp papers across a rock. The map was marked with grease pencil, grid references, flight paths, coordinates. One line was circled, "Recon Corridor," Lambert said softly. "They were flying right over our zone." Mason pointed at the circle. "That's close, real close." Lambert nodded. If this bird was reporting back before she went down, command might know where she fell. They'll send someone to look. Mason looked up at the rising smoke. Then this might save us. They stayed long enough to gather what supplies they could. A few rations, 1 flare, a canteen half full of rainwater. As they turned to leave, Lambert paused. "We'll mark the site. If rescue comes, we want them to see this from the air." He took a piece of broken paneling and laid it flat, forming a crude arrow in the mud pointing toward their own clearing. Mason stacked a few stones at its base. When they were done, Lambert took one last look at the wreck. "You brought us a signal, friend," he said quietly. Even in death, the wind shifted, carrying the smoke east, toward where their own crash lay hidden beneath the trees. Mason adjusted his pack. "Let's bring our boys some good news." Lambert nodded for once, and together they began the long walk back, following the faint hum of the river and the quiet whisper of the jungle that never truly slept. The journey back felt longer than the one that had brought them out. The heat was heavier now, the jungle air thick and damp like steam rising off iron. Every step came with the creak of gear, the steady rasp of boots through undergrowth, and the low hum of unseen life. Lambert led the way, machete in hand, carving through vines and creepers. The map case was strapped to his chest, protected from the rain that now drifted softly from the canopy. Behind him, Mason trudged on, his rifle slung and his thoughts quiet. "Never thought I'd miss the sound of engines," he muttered. Lambert gave a tired chuckle. "You and me both." By late afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking their crash site. The clearing lay below, still cloaked in smoke and shadow. The Huey's tail boom jutted upward like the spine of a dead animal. They could see movement. McGill and Reyes tending a small fire, Blake perched beside them, writing in his battered notebook again. The sight filled Lambert with something like relief. He raised his arm and waved. McGill spotted them first. "Hey, they're back!" Reyes scrambled up, waving both arms. "You found something?" Lambert and Mason slid down the slope, boots kicking loose stones, and crossed into the clearing. The others crowded around as Lambert pulled out the folded map. "Found a loach downriver," he said. "Went down maybe a day or two ago. Crew's gone. One confirmed dead. But this," he tapped the circled flight path, "means command might have seen the crash. If they did, there's a chance they'll send a bird to check it out." McGill frowned. "Or they already did and found nothing." "Maybe," Lambert said. "But that wreck's still smoking. Even if they didn't know, they will soon." Reyes let out a slow breath. "So we've got hope. Hope's what keeps us moving," Mason said. They ate in silence that evening. The rain thickened, turning the ash around their fire into black mud. When night came, they sheltered under the wing section and tried to rest, though no one truly slept. Sometime past midnight, Mason stirred. He thought he'd heard something, a low thumping noise, distant but rhythmic. He sat up, squinting into the darkness. "Lambert," he whispered, "you hear that?" Lambert was already awake, his head tilted, listening. Then he nodded slowly. Rotor blades. The sound came faint but steady, carried through the wet air, a deep, pulsing echo that rose and fell as it drew nearer. Reyes scrambled to his feet. "Could be rescue!" "Or could be Charlie," McGill warned. Lambert grabbed the flare gun, loaded the single red flare they'd salvaged, and held it tight. "We wait until we're sure," he said quietly. The thumping grew louder, closer. It moved in a slow arc overhead, the sound rolling through the trees like thunder. For a moment, a light cut through the rain, a white search beam flickering across the treetops. Lambert raised the flare gun halfway, his thumb hovering over the trigger. "Come on," he whispered, "just a little closer." The helicopter's noise swelled until it filled the clearing. Then, just as suddenly, it began to fade, turning away. "Wait! No! Don't!" Reyes shouted. But it was too late. The sound dwindled into nothing. Lambert lowered the flare, his jaw tight. "They didn't see us." Mason clenched his fists. "We were right here." Reyes kicked the mud, cursing under his breath. For a long moment, the only sound was rain tapping against metal. Finally, Lambert looked toward the dark horizon. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Smoke like that doesn't vanish. They'll see it." No one replied, but all of them turned their eyes to the sky, waiting for a sound that never came. Dawn broke with the same gray light that had haunted them for days. The rain had eased to a soft mist, but the air was still heavy with the smell of damp earth and fuel. The wreck lay silent, blackened metal gleaming faintly beneath the clouds. Lambert stood by what used to be the rotor assembly, his hands resting on his knees. His eyes followed the sky, searching for any sign of movement, a speck, a glimmer, the echo of a distant engine. Nothing. Only the sound of the forest waking. Reyes sat nearby, rubbing his hands together. "They flew right over us," he said quietly. "Right over." "Could have been search and rescue," McGill muttered. "Could have been recon. Either way, they missed." Lambert didn't answer. He was staring at the half-empty flare gun lying beside him. Its single round, their last one, seemed to glow faintly red even in the dull light. Mason walked up, adjusting his helmet. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lambert exhaled slowly. "We light smoke again, a bigger fire this time. Maybe they come back. Or maybe we bring Charlie right down on us," McGill said. "You know they're moving through these valleys. We start another fire, we might as well hand them an invitation." Reyes looked between them, his face drawn. "But if we don't, we're just waiting to die." No one spoke. The jungle filled the silence for them. Birds crying in the canopy, the low hum of insects, the faint trickle of water down the slope. Finally, Lambert stood. "We light it." Mason gave a short nod. "I'll help you gather fuel." McGill sighed. "God help us." They worked through the morning, breaking branches, dragging scraps of the wreck, and piling them in the open where the clearing met the ridge. Lambert soaked the heap with the last of their aviation fuel, then struck a match from his waterproof tin. The flame caught instantly, racing through the fuel, and the fire rose fast. Orange against the gray, thick black smoke coiled upward, twisting into the clouds. It looked almost beautiful. Reyes stared at it, his eyes bright. "If they're out there, they'll see that." Lambert nodded, though his gaze never left the tree line. "If they're out there." Hours passed. The fire burned high, then low. Sweat rolled down their faces. The smoke drifted in heavy curtains, spreading through the valley. Mason sat by the wreck, wiping ash from his hands. "If that doesn't get their attention, nothing will." McGill gave a short, humorless laugh. "Or we just told the whole jungle where to find us." The others didn't answer. The day stretched on, slow and thick with waiting. Every gust of wind made them flinch. Every bird call drew their eyes to the trees. Then, faintly, somewhere beyond the ridge, came a sound. A pop. Then another. Gunfire. The men froze. Lambert's hand went to his rifle. "Positions!" he barked. Reyes dove behind the overturned fuselage. Mason dropped beside the wing, and McGill took cover near the fire, rifle braced against his shoulder. The shots came again. Short, controlled bursts. Then silence. Reyes whispered, "Could be the enemy, or someone in trouble." Lambert's voice was steady but quiet. "Either way, we're not alone anymore." He looked once at the smoke, still curling above them like a signal to heaven, and realized whatever they had called, someone had heard. The jungle held its breath after the gunfire. Every man in the clearing stayed perfectly still, fingers tightening around their rifles, eyes scanning the green shadows. Even the insects had gone quiet. Lambert crouched low, moving toward the edge of the clearing. His boots sank into the soft ground as he peered through the brush. The smoke from their fire hung low now, curling between the trunks like fog. Another shot cracked through the air. Closer this time, maybe 200 yards to the east. Mason whispered, "That ain't random. That's aimed." Lambert nodded, eyes narrowing. "They're signaling or warning," McGill muttered, "or hunting." Lambert motioned for silence and pointed to Mason. Together, they crept through the ferns toward the sound. The world became a tunnel of leaves and dripping vines. Every step sounded too loud, every breath too sharp. They reached a small rise overlooking a dry creek bed. Down below, they saw movement. 3 figures in dark green uniforms moving in a crouch. Their helmets were foreign, their rifles old. Lambert exhaled slowly. "NVA, North Vietnamese." Mason adjusted his grip on his weapon. Guess they saw our little smoke show. They're scouting, Lambert said. Not full patrol numbers. If they were, we'd already be dead. He watched the men below. One carried a map. Another scanned the canopy with binoculars. They moved with care. Professional. Quiet. Mason whispered, "We could take 'em. Quick." Lambert shook his head. "No, let 'em pass. If they think the fire's a crash site with no survivors, they'll just report it and move on." So they waited. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The NVA soldiers paused now and then, speaking softly to each other in tones that barely reached the leaves. Then, finally, they turned south and disappeared into the thick underbrush. Lambert let out a slow breath. "That was too close." Mason nodded. "They'll be back if they smell bodies." "Then we give them nothing to find." They made their way back to the clearing, quiet as ghosts. Reyes and McGill were waiting, their faces tense. Reyes spoke first. "What was it?" "Scouts," Lambert said. "3 of 'em, passed east. Didn't see us." McGill spat into the mud. "Good. Maybe they won't come back." Lambert crouched near the dying fire, watching the smoke twist upward. "They'll come back," he said softly, "but maybe not before help does." The others looked to him, silent. No one wanted to ask the question that hung between them, how long they could keep waiting before luck ran out. By evening, the fire was just embers. Mason kept watch while the others rested. The rain started again, soft and steady. Sometime near dusk, a faint mechanical sound rose in the distance. Not gunfire this time, but the low thrum of engines. Lambert sat up instantly. "You hear that?" Mason stood, eyes scanning the dark horizon. "Yeah, that's no chopper. That's—" He paused, listening. "That's armor." The ground began to tremble, barely perceptible at first, then stronger. Reyes whispered, "Tanks? Here." Lambert shook his head slowly. "Not ours." He turned toward the jungle, the firelight flickering across his face. "We need to move. Now." The earth gave a low, distant growl that rolled through the clearing like thunder. Loose stones rattled. The thin walls of the wrecked Huey shivered as if alive. Lambert was already on his feet. "Pack what you can carry. We move west." No one argued. There wasn't time. Mason kicked dirt over the embers. Reyes stuffed the remaining rations into a torn satchel, and McGill checked his rifle one last time. The familiar rhythm of panic moved through them like a drill they'd done 100 times before. Fast, efficient, but heavy with dread. The rumble grew louder. It wasn't steady like a truck convoy. It came in pulses, the deep, stuttering growl of heavy treads hitting uneven ground. Lambert muttered, "Soviet armor, maybe a PT-76 light tank. NVA could have pushed it down river." Mason shot him a quick look. "In this jungle? That's suicide." Lambert's jaw tightened. "Not if they're following our smoke. That armor means they're confident." They slipped into the trees, moving fast and low. The jungle swallowed them whole. Leaves brushed their faces, mud pulled at their boots. The sound of the engines echoed through the hills, sometimes near, sometimes fading, like a giant beast hunting in circles. Reyes whispered, "How far do we go?" Lambert didn't look back. "Until we can't hear it anymore." The rain began again, a heavy drenching sheet that blurred sight and sound. It made their progress slower, but it also muffled noise. For once, they were grateful. They crossed a narrow stream, the water cold around their ankles. Mason paused halfway, turning back toward the direction of the crash. "You think rescue will still come?" Lambert stopped, looking over his shoulder. "If they saw the smoke, they'll come, but we can't wait to find out who gets here first." McGill muttered, "Hell of a choice." They pressed on, climbing over fallen logs and ducking beneath hanging vines. Every sound felt sharper now. The crack of branches, the splash of water, the hollow echo of their breathing. After nearly an hour, they reached higher ground. The rumble of armor had faded into the distance. The jungle was quiet again, except for the rain. Lambert dropped to one knee, scanning the valley below. Through a break in the trees, he could still see the faint black column of smoke rising from where they'd been. Reyes followed his gaze. "If those tanks get to the crash, they'll find it empty." "That's the idea," Lambert said. They rested under a large tree, the canopy giving them some shelter. Mason pulled out his canteen, shaking it. "Half left." "Share it," Lambert said simply. McGill gave a low chuckle, bitter and tired. "We're ghosts now, wandering through someone else's war." Lambert glanced at him. "Ours isn't over yet." The rain began to thin, turning into mist. A breeze carried the smell of smoke and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter thundered faintly. Or maybe it was only thunder itself. For a long while, no one spoke. The silence of the jungle returned, slow and indifferent. Finally, Lambert said quietly, "We'll move again at dawn." Reyes looked up. "And if we don't hear rescue?" Lambert stared at the horizon, his voice steady. "Then we find our own way out." By morning, the rain had stopped. Mist drifted through the jungle like smoke, curling around the roots and vines. The men moved carefully, their clothes still soaked, their faces drawn from fatigue. Every step was deliberate, not just to stay quiet, but to keep from collapsing. Lambert led with his map in hand, following the ridgeline. The terrain sloped downward toward a patch of open ground. As the fog lifted, he saw something unusual through the trees. Straight lines, hard edges, where nature didn't belong. He raised a hand. "Hold." They crouched low, eyes scanning the clearing ahead. There, tucked between the trees, stood the remains of an old outpost. Sandbags half rotted, tin roofing rusted through, a watchtower leaning like a dying tree. Jungle vines wrapped around everything, reclaiming it inch by inch. Reyes whispered, "You think it's enemy?" "Not anymore," Lambert said. "Too quiet." They advanced slowly, weapons raised. The camp was small, maybe a dozen structures, enough for a platoon once. But now it was silent. No footprints in the mud, no smoke, no sound except the hum of flies around something unseen. Mason climbed the steps to the tilted watchtower. From the top, he scanned the horizon with a pair of cracked binoculars left behind. "Jungle as far as I can see," he called down. "No movement, no patrols." Lambert nodded. "Let's sweep it." They moved through the ruins in pairs. Inside the main hut, Lambert found old ammo crates, termite-bitten and empty. A few rusted helmets lay scattered on the floor. On one wall, a faded flag, red with a yellow star, hung limp and water-stained. Reyes pushed open another door and froze. "Sir, you'll want to see this." Lambert stepped in. The air smelled of mildew and oil. Against the far wall sat a wooden table, and on it a radio, a bulky, battered field unit, its casing dented but intact. Mason let out a low whistle. Looks like our luck might have finally turned. Lambert moved closer, brushing away a layer of dust. If it works, he turned a dial. Static crackled faintly through the speaker. McGill grinned for the first time in days. That's a sound I could get used to. Don't celebrate yet, Lambert said. We'll need power. Reyes was already rummaging through the back of the hut. There's a battery pack here, heavy but dry. Looks like someone stored it up high. Lambert helped him lower it down. They hooked it in carefully, the metal connectors sparking as they met. Then a faint hum. Static filled the room again, sharper now. Lambert adjusted the frequency knob slowly, his ear close to the speaker. Mayday, this is Echo. Repeat, this is Echo unit requesting. The signal vanished into static. The men froze. Mason leaned forward. That was English. Lambert's hands tightened on the dial. Come on, come on. The voice didn't return. Just the hiss of empty air. McGill rubbed his face. Could have been anyone. Could have been recorded. Lambert sat back, thinking. Could have been real, too. If someone's transmitting, we're not the only ones left out here. Reyes smiled weakly. Then maybe we're not forgotten. Outside, a bird cried, and the jungle wind whispered through the ruined walls. For the first time in days, the men allowed themselves a small breath of hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. Lambert sat in front of the radio, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the small green indicator light that flickered weakly with every burst of static. The rest of the men gathered close, silent. It was the first real sign of connection they'd had since the crash. Something that cut through the endless noise of the jungle. He pressed the transmitter button. This is downed Huey Bravo 7, call sign Falcon 2-1, requesting immediate response. Repeat, this is Falcon 2-1, survivors of downed helicopter requesting assistance. He released the button. Only static replied, soft, hollow, endless. Reyes whispered, Try again, sir. Lambert adjusted the frequency knob, the static sliding up and down in tone. He pressed the button once more. Any station, any unit, this is Falcon 2-1. We are alive. Coordinates unknown, jungle terrain, enemy presence confirmed. Request response. Again, silence. Mason leaned against the wall, his expression dark. Maybe the transmitter shot. Maybe, Lambert said, though his eyes didn't leave the radio. Or maybe they're hearing us and just can't answer yet. He tried again, and again. Each time his voice grew quieter, not weaker, but heavier, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. Finally, as he adjusted the dial one last time, something shifted in the static. A faint pop, then a burst of garbled sound. Copy. Falcon 2. Repeat. Identify your... The men froze. Lambert leaned forward fast, pressing the button. This is Falcon 2-1. We read you over. We have 5 survivors, limited supplies, requesting pickup. The signal hissed, then broke into fragments. Falcon. Stand by. Triangulating. Do not. Then silence again. Mason's hands were shaking. They heard us. Reyes grinned for the first time in days. They heard us! Lambert sat back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since the crash, the tension in his shoulders eased. We stay put, he said. If they're triangulating, they'll come looking for the signal. McGill frowned. How long? As long as it takes. Lambert said. They fortified the outpost as best they could, setting up watch shifts and rationing what little food they had left. The fire they built that night was small and smokeless, hidden under the ruined roof. Outside, the jungle hummed. The mist thickened. Every rustle sounded like footsteps. Near midnight, Mason sat on watch, the radio at his side. It had been silent for hours, just the low hum of background noise. Then, click! The speaker popped faintly, and a voice whispered through the static. Falcon 2-1, stay where you are. We're coming. Mason froze, leaning close. Say again, over. But the voice didn't repeat. It was gone as quickly as it came. He stared at the radio for a long moment, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. Then he woke Lambert and told him what he'd heard. Lambert listened quietly, his expression unreadable. You sure it was English? Mason nodded. Clear as day. Lambert looked at the radio again, the green light still flickering faintly. Then we'll wait, he said softly. But keep your rifles close, because in the jungle, voices didn't always belong to friends. Morning came slow, the light breaking through the canopy in thin golden threads. The men looked different that day. Tired, yes, but with a quiet flicker of hope in their eyes. Mason kept glancing at the radio as if it might speak again at any second. Lambert brewed weak coffee from their dwindling supply. He handed each man a tin cup and said, No word since the call? Mason shook his head. Nothing but static. Maybe they're moving to our position. Reyes leaned against the wall. Or maybe that wasn't them at all. The words hung in the air. No one wanted to say it, but everyone had thought it. The jungle was full of tricks, voices that weren't real, movements that vanished when you looked twice. And the Viet Cong had been known to use captured radios for ambushes. Lambert set his cup down. We keep our heads. We'll post guards. Keep eyes on all angles. If they're coming for us, whoever they are, we'll be ready. By noon, the jungle had gone almost completely still, not silent, but heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Reyes and McGill took watch near the outer perimeter, crouched low behind a fallen tree. McGill had his rifle steady, scanning the tree line. You ever think, Reyes whispered, we won't make it home? McGill gave a small grin. You're saying that now, when we might actually be rescued? I don't know, man, Reyes murmured. It's like this place doesn't let go. You feel that? Before McGill could answer, something moved in the brush. Soft, deliberate. Both men froze. Eyes up, McGill whispered. The movement came again. Then faintly, a voice. American, soldiers. Reyes blinked. The voice was rough, hesitant, definitely human, but off somehow. Who's there? McGill called. No reply. Only that strange echo of breathing in the trees. Lambert heard the exchange and stepped out from the shelter, rifle in hand. Hold your fire, he ordered, moving to join them. Then the voice again, closer this time. We help you. Lambert motioned for the men to stay low. He raised the rifle and called out, Identify yourself. Nothing. Then a single rifle crack. The bullet hit the dirt a foot from McGill's boot. Down! Lambert shouted. The tree line erupted. Gunfire shredded leaves and splintered wood. The squad dove for cover, returning fire in short, disciplined bursts. The jungle flashed with muzzle light, the sound a deafening storm in the thick air. Reyes screamed over the noise. Ambush! They used the radio! Lambert's jaw tightened. Fall back! Move! Move! They scrambled deeper into the ruins, bullets tearing through the walls. Mason dragged the radio to safety, its antenna bent and sparking. When the shooting finally stopped, the jungle went quiet again. Too quiet. Lambert crouched, breathing hard, checking each man. They'd all survived, though McGill had a graze across his arm. Reyes spat into the dirt. So much for help. Lambert looked at the radio, still humming faintly. The same frequency that had brought hope now sat like a snake on the table. They knew our call sign, Lambert said softly. They were listening the whole time. No one spoke. The jungle's hum returned slow and heavy, and somewhere out there, just beyond the green, a voice laughed quietly, before fading back into the static. Morning light crept through the cracks of their shelter, thin rays slicing across damp walls. The squad stirred slowly, every man moving like the air itself had weight. The jungle had gone strangely quiet after the ambush. No birds, no frogs, no hum. Just the faint buzz of flies drifting over broken leaves. Lambert sat apart from the others, staring at the radio on the ground. The metal casing was scratched and dented, its antenna bent at an angle. He didn't touch it. Not yet. Reyes sat against a wall, his bandaged arm pressed close to his chest. "So, what's the call, Captain?" he asked, voice dry. Lambert didn't look up. "We don't stay here. They know our position. We move at dawn, head south toward the river." McGill frowned. "You think we can make it? That's at least 10 clicks through jungle, maybe more. Better than waiting for ghosts to find us," Lambert said quietly. "Pack light. Leave anything that slows you down." The others exchanged glances. Mason crouched near the radio, still haunted by the thought that the signal, the call for help, might have been real. "Sir," he said, hesitating, "what if that voice, what if it wasn't a trick? What if command really was trying to reach us?" Lambert's jaw tightened. "If they were, we'll find them on the move, but we're not sitting ducks again." He rose, stretched his sore back, and looked each man in the eye. "We're not dying in this hole, not today." As the night deepened, they made final preparations, cleaned rifles, checked ammunition, tore strips of cloth for makeshift bandages. Nobody spoke much. The jungle hummed faintly, a living thing that seemed to breathe around them. Before sleeping, Mason touched the radio one last time. Static whispered back, a low pulse in the darkness. For a moment, he thought he heard something, maybe his own name. But when he leaned closer, there was nothing, only the endless hiss of white noise. Lambert watched him from across the room and finally said, "Turn it off, son." Mason obeyed. The silence that followed felt heavier than gunfire. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called once and then was silent. The rain started soon after, soft at first, then steady. Lambert closed his eyes and whispered a single thought, too quiet for the others to hear. "We move at dawn, if the jungle lets us." Dawn came with a thick mist that clung to the ground like smoke. The jungle smelled of wet earth and decay, every breath heavy and damp. Lambert was the first to move, shouldering his rifle and checking the horizon. There was no sound except the slow dripping of rain from the leaves above. "Let's move," he said quietly. The men fell into line, one after the other, Lambert in front, McGill at the rear, Reyes limping but determined to keep pace. They carried what little remained, rifles, canteens, a few rations, and the damaged radio Mason refused to leave behind. The jungle closed in around them fast. Vines brushed their shoulders. Roots clawed at their boots. The deeper they went, the darker it became. Sunlight barely broke through the thick canopy. After an hour, Reyes called out softly, "Feels like we're walking in circles." "We're not," Lambert answered, though his voice lacked conviction. He checked the compass. South-southeast. Still right. They pushed on. Birds scattered as they passed, and once the faint rustle of movement made all of them freeze. McGill raised his rifle, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. "Probably monkeys," Mason muttered, trying to sound confident. Lambert didn't reply. He'd been in the jungle long enough to know that when the forest went silent, it wasn't monkeys. By mid-morning, the heat was suffocating. Sweat poured down their necks, and the air shimmered with insects. The sound of boots in mud became a rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2, like a slow heartbeat. They stopped in a small clearing to drink from their canteens. Reyes sat heavily on a fallen log, wiping his forehead. "Captain, we can't keep this pace all day." "We'll rest when we hit higher ground," Lambert said, scanning the tree line. "We need a vantage point before nightfall." Mason crouched near a patch of ferns, checking his map, though most of the landmarks were useless now. The jungle had shifted, swallowed everything recognizable. McGill spoke quietly, his voice almost lost in the wind. "Feels like we're being watched again." Lambert's eyes followed his. There. Movement, faint and low to the ground. He raised his hand for silence. The squad froze. A shadow passed between the trees. Then another. Lambert whispered, "Eyes up." Seconds stretched into minutes. Nothing. Only the flutter of leaves. Finally, Reyes exhaled. Guess it was nothing. But Lambert kept staring at the same spot. Something in the air had changed. A subtle vibration, a feeling deep in the gut. "Stay sharp," he murmured. They moved again, slower this time, rifles at the ready. The mist began to thin, and faint rays of light cut through the canopy, glinting off their helmets. For a brief moment, the jungle almost looked peaceful, like it was pretending. Lambert led them onward, deeper into the green maze, each step taking them further from safety and closer to whatever waited beyond the silence. By the time the mist lifted, the sun had begun to press hard against the canopy, turning the jungle into a humid furnace. Every step now came with effort. Their uniforms clung to their backs, soaked through with sweat. Flies hovered around their faces, unbothered by the men's tired swats. Lambert checked his compass again, squinting in the glare. "We're still on course," he muttered, though his voice carried little assurance. Reyes limped along behind him, the makeshift bandage on his arm now dark with dirt. "Feels like the whole world's just green," he said softly. "No sky, no ground, just green." McGill gave a tired laugh. "Welcome to paradise." Then Mason, walking a few steps ahead, stopped suddenly. "Captain," he whispered, pointing through the trees. "Smoke." Lambert raised his rifle instinctively. Through a break in the canopy, a thin column of gray curled upward, dissolving into the bright air. It was distant, but steady, controlled, not wild. "Could be a signal fire," Mason said. "Could be a trap," Lambert replied. "We move in slow, eyes open." They advanced cautiously, spreading out just enough to cover each other's flanks. The jungle floor grew rougher, littered with roots and debris. The closer they got, the stronger the smell became. Wood smoke, but tinged with something else. When they finally broke through the last line of trees, they found what remained of a small camp. Tents burned down to their frames. Empty shell casings glimmered in the dirt. A rusted cooking pot lay overturned beside a shattered crate. McGill crouched near a blackened patch of earth. "Viet Cong camp," he said, "hit hard and not long ago." Reyes knelt beside a scorched pack. "Looks like they didn't stand a chance." Lambert's eyes swept across the clearing. There were no bodies, but there were marks. Deep scuffs in the mud, drag lines leading into the brush. "They took their dead," he said quietly. Mason knelt by a fallen tree where the smoke still rose faintly. "Could it have been Americans?" Lambert shook his head. "No U.S. unit this deep, not since the last push." They circled the site in silence. The jungle had already begun to reclaim it, leaves and vines curling around the ashes. The air carried that strange, electric feeling, the one that told them they were not alone. Then faintly, a sound came from beyond the trees. Not the sharp crack of gunfire this time, but something softer, a single voice. It was impossible to tell if it was speaking English or not. Just a faint murmur, drifting with the wind. Lambert raised his hand for silence. The men froze. The voice stopped, too. After a long minute, he said quietly, "Let's move. This place isn't safe." They slipped back into the jungle, leaving the burnt camp behind. But as they walked, Mason glanced over his shoulder one last time. The smoke was gone now, swallowed by the canopy, and yet he could have sworn he saw movement in the ashes, a single figure standing motionless in the haze, watching them go. The men pressed on in silence. The jungle seemed to close tighter around them with each mile, branches tangling overhead, vines brushing their faces like the fingers of something unseen. Every sound now felt deliberate, as though the forest was breathing in rhythm with their steps. Mason kept glancing at the compass. "We're still heading southeast," he said, though his voice trembled with fatigue. Lambert nodded, but didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere, on the smoke, on the strange whisper they'd heard. The jungle had a way of making you doubt everything, even your own senses. An hour later, McGill crouched suddenly, motioning for them to stop. He pointed to the ground. "Tracks," he whispered. They gathered around. Clear footprints led through the mud, small, barefoot, spaced unevenly, heading in the same direction they were traveling. "Viet Cong?" Mason asked. "Too light," McGill said. "Maybe villagers." Lambert studied the prints. Or bait. The men exchanged wary looks, but turning back wasn't an option. They were too deep now. The promise of the river, of escape, was the only thing keeping them upright. They followed the tracks cautiously, rifles at the ready. The trail wound through thick brush, past fallen trees and shallow pools where frogs croaked lazily. The footprints grew fresher. "Someone's close," Reyes muttered. The path began to slope downward, leading into a narrow ravine. It was shaded, quiet, too quiet. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Lambert's instincts screamed. He raised a hand. "Hold position!" But before the words could settle, a twig snapped. Then came the explosion. A mine detonated just ahead, throwing dirt and debris into the air. The blast knocked Mason backward, ears ringing, vision white. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the ravine. Short, precise bursts. Ambush! McGill shouted, firing blind into the trees. Take cover! Lambert yelled. He dove behind a fallen log, bullets splintering the wood above him. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Reyes crawled to the side, clutching his shoulder, hit again, but still alive. They were waiting for us, he cried. Fall back, Lambert ordered. Get to high ground. The men scrambled up the slope, returning fire in short, panicked bursts. The jungle flashed with muzzle light, orange, fleeting, deadly. Leaves and bark exploded around them. After what felt like an eternity, the gunfire stopped. The forest went dead silent again, as if it had swallowed the fight whole. Lambert stayed low, breathing hard. Sound off. Mason, here. McGill got you covered, Reyes groaned. Still breathing, sir. Lambert glanced back toward the ravine. Smoke drifted lazily from the crater where the mine had gone off. There was no movement now, no enemy visible, no shadows flickering between the trees. He knew better than to assume it was over. We move, he said quietly. Now. The squad pushed deeper into the jungle, limping, bruised, shaken, but alive. Behind them, the ravine lay still, and from somewhere in that silence, a faint click echoed. Another mine, armed again by unseen hands. The jungle was resetting the trap. Night fell heavy over the jungle. What little light the moon gave barely pierced the canopy, turning the world into shifting shadows and silver outlines. The men moved slowly now, each step deliberate. Every sound, a twig snap, a rustle of leaves, carried the weight of danger. They stopped in a small clearing, a rare open patch surrounded by towering trees. The air smelled of damp earth and gunpowder. McGill dropped his pack and exhaled. We can't keep going like this, Lieutenant, he said, his voice low. Lambert nodded. We rest for 10 minutes. Check Reyes. Mason knelt beside Reyes, who was slumped against a tree, breathing shallowly. The bandage on his shoulder was soaked through, dark and sticky. He needs more than a bandage, Mason murmured. Reyes opened one eye. I'm fine, he said weakly. Just give me a minute. Lambert crouched beside him. You took shrapnel, he said quietly. You're not fine. Reyes tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. Sir, if I die here, just make sure it's not for nothing. No one's dying tonight, Lambert said firmly. Not if I can help it. McGill unpacked a small med kit, what was left of it, and handed Mason a morphine syringe. Give him half, he said. We might need the rest later. Mason hesitated, but did as told. Reyes sighed as the pain dulled. His eyes fluttered, half awake, half dreaming. You ever think about home? He murmured. Lambert looked up at the trees, where the stars barely showed through the thick leaves. Every step, he said, the jungle around them was alive again. The chirping of insects, the croak of frogs, the distant hoot of an owl. Life, indifferent to war. It was almost peaceful, if not for the occasional echo of faraway gunfire. Faint, but ever present. McGill leaned against a log, rubbing his temples. They knew we were coming, he muttered. That ambush wasn't random. They've been tracking us since the ridge. Lambert said nothing. He knew McGill was right. The enemy here didn't fight for ground. They fought for survival, for time. And they knew this jungle better than any map could show. After a while, Mason whispered, Lieutenant, what if we don't make it? Lambert glanced at him. We will. But if we don't? The older man's eyes softened. Then someone else will, and they'll tell our story. The words hung in the air, heavy and still. For a moment the war felt far away, just men in the dark, clinging to hope. Then Reyes coughed, blood flecking his lip. Mason quickly wiped it away, his hands shaking. "He needs a medic," he said. "We get him one," Lambert replied. "We move at dawn. The river's still a day out." McGill checked his rifle. "If the VC don't find us first." Lambert looked out into the trees, where darkness shifted like water. "They will," he said quietly, "and when they do, we'll be ready." The men said nothing more. One by one, they drifted into uneasy sleep, rifles close, nerves tighter than wire. The jungle whispered around them, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere far off, a flare rose and fell, its light briefly touching the leaves before fading into black. And in that moment of fleeting brightness, Lambert thought he saw shapes moving, not ghosts, not enemies, but something deeper, the memory of all who had come before. Dawn came softly. The jungle awoke with it, birds calling in layers, the hum of insects swelling beneath the chorus. Mist clung to the ground like a low, ghostly tide, wrapping around boots and branches. The men rose one by one, stiff and silent, their faces pale beneath the grime. Lambert was the first to move. He checked Reyes, who was still breathing, shallow but steady. "He's holding," Mason said quietly, though his eyes betrayed doubt. The blood-soaked bandage told a different story. They moved slowly, pushing through dense foliage, machetes slicing vines heavy with dew. Every step closer to the river felt like wading through another world, one that didn't care who won or lost, only that it endured. McGill led the way now, his boots sinking into the damp soil. He paused every few minutes to listen, scanning the shadows. The air was thick, and every rustle sounded like footsteps. "We're close," he whispered. "I can smell the water." Sure enough, within minutes, the faint sound of rushing current reached them. Faint, steady, and strangely comforting. It was the sound of life beyond the war, the sound of movement, of escape. They reached the bank just as the mist began to lift. The river was wide, its surface glinting gold beneath the first rays of sunlight. It wasn't deep, but the current was fast, curling around rocks and fallen trees. Lambert crouched at the edge, his reflection rippling across the surface. "This is it," he said softly. "If we follow it north, we reach the drop zone." McGill knelt beside him, scanning the far side. "If we can cross without being seen," he muttered. "The VC could be anywhere." Lambert nodded. "They could be everywhere." Reyes stirred weakly. "Sir," he rasped, "just leave me. You'll move faster." Mason turned sharply. "Don't you dare say that again," he said. "We don't leave anyone." Lambert looked between them, his jaw tight. "No one gets left behind," he said finally. "That's not how this ends." McGill exhaled. "We'll build a raft. Vines, branches, whatever we can find." The men worked in silence. The sound of machetes cutting wood mingled with the drone of cicadas. Mason stayed by Reyes's side, talking to him softly about home, about the diner on 3rd Street, about his sister's dog, about anything that didn't smell like gunpowder and death. By the time the raft was ready, the sun was high enough to burn through the mist. They pushed off carefully, their weight shifting with the water. The current took them fast, carrying them around bends lined with thick jungle walls. For a while, it was quiet. almost peaceful. Then McGill froze. Hear that? It was faint at first, a low rumble like thunder trapped beneath the trees, but it grew louder, the sound of engines, boats. Lambert's stomach sank. "Keep low," he ordered. They pressed flat against the raft as three dark shapes emerged downstream. Enemy patrol boats moving slow, scanning the banks. Men with rifles stood at the front, their eyes sharp beneath wide-brimmed hats. The Americans drifted silently, hidden by a fallen branch that jutted into the water. For a moment, one of the soldiers on the nearest boat turned their way. Mason held his breath. He could hear the man's voice, calm, casual, as he called something to the others. Then, just as quickly, the boats drifted past, their noise fading upriver. The men didn't move for a full minute. Finally, McGill whispered, "We're not dead." "Not yet," Lambert said, eyes still on the water. "But the jungle's not done testing us." And as they floated further north, the sunlight broke through the trees again. Brief, golden, and fragile. It felt like hope. The river carried them deeper into the jungle's heart, a place where time felt older, slower. The canopy thickened overhead, turning daylight into a kind of green twilight. Everything was alive. The hiss of insects, the drip of unseen streams, the echo of something moving just out of sight. Lambert sat near the front of the raft, one hand on his rifle, eyes scanning the tree line. Every few seconds, he'd catch a glimpse of movement, shadows slipping between the branches. Sometimes it was a monkey. Sometimes it wasn't. McGill, seated behind him, muttered, "They're watching us. I can feel it." Lambert didn't disagree. "Let them watch," he said quietly. "They'll have to come close if they want to fight." Reyes stirred weakly, his voice a faint rasp. "I've been seeing them too," he said. "Figures in the trees, moving, but not like people." Mason leaned closer. "You're hallucinating, Reyes. It's the fever." Reyes smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe it's the jungle watching us back." They drifted under a low branch, leaves brushing across their helmets. The sound of the river muffled the rest of the world, turning even their own breathing into something distant. It was easy to believe the forest had eyes. Hours passed. The sun began to tilt westward, sending thin beams of orange through the canopy. The water grew shallow in places, forcing them to step out and drag the raft through mud. The silence was thick, broken only by the splash of boots and the groan of wet wood. Mason finally spoke, his voice low. "You ever wonder what it's all for? All this fighting?" McGill snorted softly. "For orders, for flags, for people who'll never see this place." Lambert glanced back at them. "For each other," he said. "That's enough." The others fell silent again. There was a kind of truth in those words that didn't need repeating. Then a sound, soft but clear, a whisper of movement in the trees. Lambert froze, raising a hand. The men stopped. The jungle itself seemed to hold its breath, and then it came, a faint, rhythmic clicking, like stones tapping together. Once, twice, pause. Once, twice again. McGill frowned. "Signal," he said. "That's a signal." The sound came from ahead, then from behind. Lambert's eyes hardened. "Ambush," he said. Bullets ripped through the silence. The sun was gone by the time they drifted downstream again. The sky above the canopy turned a deep indigo, fading into black. The only light came from the pale shimmer of the moon reflected on the water, and the faint glow of fireflies hovering like drifting embers. No one spoke for a long while. The air was thick with smoke and the faint metallic scent of spent rounds. Their hands trembled slightly, not from fear anymore, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into the bones. Lambert sat at the edge of the raft, his rifle resting across his knees. He could still hear it, the echo of gunfire in his ears, the distant cries of men who hadn't made it out of that ambush. The jungle had gone quiet again, as if nothing had happened. McGill finally broke the silence. "You ever notice," he said softly, "how this place swallows everything? Noise, blood, even the dead." Lambert glanced at him. "That's why no one wins here," he said. "The jungle takes what it wants." Reyes stirred weakly, his breathing shallow. Mason checked his pulse, then shook his head. "He's fading, Lieutenant. He won't make another day without a medic." Lambert's jaw tightened. He looked toward the river's bend ahead, where the current disappeared into darkness. "Then we find one," he said. McGill sighed, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "You keep saying that, but all I see ahead is more jungle." Lambert didn't answer. He just kept his eyes forward. "You see the jungle," he said. "I see the way home." They floated on in silence. The sounds of the night began to return. Frogs croaking, crickets buzzing, the distant hoot of an owl. Nature reclaiming the noise of man. The war, for all its fire and fury, was nothing more than a brief disturbance here. Mason leaned back, staring at the stars barely visible through the canopy. "My old man used to tell me," he murmured, "if you stare long enough at the night, it starts staring back." McGill chuckled softly. "Then what do you see?" "Faces," Mason replied. "The ones we left behind." No one responded to that. There wasn't anything to say. The raft drifted slower now, caught in a bend where the current eased. The air grew cooler, the mist returning to roll across the surface. Lambert closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the jungle fill the silence. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was the closest thing to it they'd had in days. When he opened his eyes again, he saw something ahead, a faint glow between the trees. Firelight. He raised his hand, motioning for silence. The men crouched low, rifles ready. As they drew closer, the shapes became clearer. Small huts by the riverbank, woven from bamboo and palm leaves. Smoke rose lazily from a fire pit. "Locals," McGill whispered, "or VC." Lambert studied the scene. A figure moved near the fire, stirring a pot. No uniforms, just thin, tired villagers. He lowered his rifle slightly. "They're civilians," he said. "We can't risk scaring them." Mason looked uncertain. "And if they give us up," Lambert sighed, "then that's how it goes. But Reyes needs help." He gave the signal, and the raft drifted toward the shore. The villagers looked up as the Americans approached, wide-eyed, cautious, silent. Lambert stepped onto the muddy bank and raised his hands, palms open. "We're not here to fight," he said softly. "We just need help." One of the older villagers, a man with weathered skin and weary eyes, stepped forward. He studied them for a long moment before nodding once. The men exhaled in relief. For the first time in days, they might finally rest. But even as they pulled Reyes ashore, Lambert couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle was still watching, silent, waiting. Because in Vietnam, even silence had its own sound. The village was small, barely more than a dozen huts, all woven from bamboo and thatched palm leaves. Smoke from cooking fires curled upward, vanishing into the heavy air. Chickens scattered as the soldiers stepped ashore, their boots sinking into the wet mud. The villagers kept their distance, eyes wary. Most of them were women, children, and old men. The war had taken the rest. Lambert approached slowly, rifle slung behind his back, his hands still raised. "We mean no harm," he said again, voice steady but tired. "One of ours is hurt." The older man who'd stepped forward earlier spoke in broken English. "American?" "Yes," Lambert said. "We just need medicine, water, a place to rest." The villager studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He motioned toward one of the huts. "Bring him," he said. Mason and McGill carried Reyes inside. The hut was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. The air smelled of herbs and smoke. An elderly woman moved quietly in the corner, preparing a small bowl of leaves and roots. She didn't speak, but her hands were practiced, confident. McGill whispered, "You think she's a doctor?" Lambert replied. "Out here, everyone learns how to heal someone." The woman worked quickly, pressing the poultice to Rhea's wound. He winced, but didn't cry out. She murmured something under her breath, not words they could understand, but the tone was soft, almost like a prayer. Outside, the village carried on cautiously. A few children peeked from behind doorways, staring at the soldiers with a mix of curiosity and fear. Mason gave one of them a small piece of chocolate from his pack. The boy hesitated, then snatched it and ran. McGill chuckled quietly. "Guess we're not that scary after all." Lambert didn't answer. His eyes were scanning the tree line. Even here, among civilians, he couldn't shake the habit of looking for threats. The jungle loomed beyond the huts, dark, endless, whispering. After a while, the old villager approached again. "You go soon," he said. "No stay." Lambert nodded. "We understand. We'll leave when he can walk." The man frowned. "Night not safe. Viet Cong come from river. They see you. They kill us all." The words hung heavy in the air. Lambert knew he was right. American soldiers in a village like this meant danger for everyone. But leaving Reyes behind wasn't an option. "We'll be gone before dark," Lambert promised. The villager gave a small nod, then pointed toward the north. "Follow river 2 hour. Big path. Maybe you find your people." Lambert clasped his hands together in thanks. "Come on," he said, the few Vietnamese words he'd learned meaning "thank you." The man's eyes softened, just slightly. Back in the hut, Reyes was breathing easier. The bleeding had slowed, and color was beginning to return to his face. "Guess I'm not done yet," he murmured weakly. "Not by a long shot," Mason said with a faint smile. For a few quiet moments it almost felt normal. The fire crackling softly, the sound of crickets outside, the faint murmur of distant river water. But then, somewhere in the jungle, a single gunshot cracked the air. The villagers froze. The woman tending Reyes stopped moving, her hands trembling. The old man ran to the doorway, his expression dark. McGill tensed. "That's close." Lambert's voice was calm but sharp. "Pack up. We move now." Outside, the jungle silence returned, heavy, waiting. The soldiers gathered their things quickly, lifting Reyes gently onto a makeshift stretcher, and as they slipped back toward the river under the fading light, Lambert looked back once. The villagers were already putting out their fires, disappearing into the dark. He knew what that meant. The war wasn't done with them either. The men moved quickly, slipping back through the narrow trails that wound between the huts and into the thick jungle beyond. The air was heavy again, the kind that clings to your skin and fills your lungs like steam. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every whisper of leaves felt like a warning. Lambert led the way, machete in one hand, rifle slung at his side. Behind him, McGill and Mason carried Reyes on a makeshift stretcher of bamboo and canvas. The wounded man stirred weakly, but said nothing. He didn't need to. His breathing told the story, shallow, uneven, but still there. "Keep low," Lambert whispered. "If they heard that shot, they'll be on us." McGill grunted. "Yeah, well, I don't think they're sending us an invitation to dinner." The faintest hint of a smile crossed Lambert's face, but it didn't last. The jungle ahead opened to a small clearing, brightened by shafts of moonlight breaking through the trees. For a brief moment, it almost looked peaceful, until the distant rumble of engines rolled through the night. Mason froze. "Boats coming from upriver." Lambert raised a hand. "Down! Everyone down!" They dropped to the ground, pressing themselves into the wet earth. The sound grew louder. Diesel engines, moving slow and steady. Voices carried across the water sharp and clipped. Vietnamese. Search patrols. The men held their breath as the boats passed, their lights sweeping the shoreline. The beams cut through the mist, briefly illuminating their faces, then moved on. No one dared move until the sound faded completely into the distance. Finally, McGill exhaled. That was too damn close. Lambert motioned forward. "We stay off the river for now. Cut through the jungle and meet it again further north." They pushed on, hacking through vines, crossing patches of knee-deep mud that sucked at their boots. The air was alive with the hum of insects and the occasional distant gunshot, echoes from someone else's fight. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of their footsteps and the rustle of leaves brushing against their helmets. Mason began humming softly under his breath, something slow and old, maybe a song from home. It didn't fit this place, but somehow it helped. Reyes stirred. "What's that?" he whispered. "Something my mom used to sing," Mason said quietly. "Back when the world made sense." Reyes gave a faint, tired smile. "Does it ever?" "Maybe once," Mason said. "Not anymore." They reached a narrow ridge overlooking the river. Below, the water shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Calm, deceptively calm. Lambert studied it, his expression unreadable. "We cross here," he said. McGill frowned. "That current'll take us downstream fast." "That's the idea," Lambert replied. "We ride it till dawn. With luck, we'll drift past their lines before they know we're there." They lowered the stretcher carefully into the water, using the raft they'd repaired earlier. One by one, they climbed aboard. The current grabbed hold immediately, pulling them along like a living thing. The jungle slid by in silence, trees reflected upside down on the dark surface. For the first time in days, no one spoke. Mason watched the tree line fade behind them. "Think we'll make it?" Lambert didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the horizon, a thin strip of pale light growing slowly ahead. "Maybe," he said finally, "if the jungle lets us." McGill gave a quiet laugh. "That's a hell of a thing to bet on." Lambert just nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Out here, it's the only thing we've got." The raft drifted on, swallowed by mist and shadow. Behind them, Somewhere deep in the jungle, the faint echo of gunfire rose again, a reminder that the war never truly slept. But for now, under the slow-turning stars, they were alive, and that was enough. And so, the story of Lambert and his men drifts away with the river, like so many memories carried downstream by time itself. What happened next was never written in the official reports. There were medals, perhaps, maybe a line or two in a forgotten file. But what truly remained were the sounds, the faces, the quiet bond between soldiers who had walked through fire together. In the years that followed, Lambert would sit by his porch sometimes, watching the rain fall against the fields, hearing faint echoes of the jungle in the rustling leaves. He never spoke much about the war. Few of them did. But on quiet nights, when the world seemed still enough, he would remember. Not the fear, not the fighting, but the silence that came afterward. That strange, heavy peace that only those who survived could ever really understand. History, you see, isn't just about battles or victories. It's about people. Ordinary souls caught in extraordinary moments. Men who laughed, cursed, prayed, and carried on even when the world seemed to have forgotten them. And somewhere, in that endless stretch of time, their stories live on, whispered softly in the wind or told in voices like mine, one old story at a time. If you've made it this far, my friend, thank you for keeping their memory alive. These stories are not just history. They are a reminder of who we once were and what we should never forget. So before you drift to sleep or move on to another tale, consider subscribing to Commander Hawk History, where every night the past comes alive again, slowly, quietly, and truthfully told. Until next time, sleep well, soldier.